Hey everyone, it's Silverfuse here today to talk about the patch notes that were released today and they will be implemented tomorrow. I'm going to be talking about the nerfs, buffs, and then what the winners and losers were of the patch, as well as what I think the new future tier 1 decks will be and if some of them will just remain tier 1 instead. First champion to get a buff this patch was Lux, and I am really excited about this because Lux is my favorite League of Legends character. She had a 3-4 stat line and is now buffed up to a 4-5 stat line. Doesn't change her ability. I heard some people say that Final Spark is no longer fleeting, but Final Spark also never had fleeting on the original portrait itself. It only had it on the spell, so I'm not sure if that's necessarily a change. I think it's just going to be a stat line change here. I think this will help her out quite a bit. She was already starting to see some play in some of the Heimerdinger decks, and even though her problem isn't necessarily her stat line, 6 mana is just a really hefty price, but I think this does help, and I think it will help her see more play. Our next champion to see a buff is Yasuo, which I'm sure a lot of people are very excited about. Yasuo is a card that a lot of people were trying to make work in various ways, and it just ended up being a bit too slow. Stunning 6 creatures takes a while, and all of the big cards at the end are just like they're bigger bodies that aren't being played. Very fast elusive decks had been going right under it, and I think this will help it out some. I don't think it's going to make Yasuo insane by any means, but I think we're going to see him a lot more in the latter, except for the fact that Ionia did get hurt a lot, and we'll be talking about that soon. But for now, we're going to go on to the next card. Our next card to receive a buff was the Crimson Curator. It is now a 3 health card instead of a 2 health card, which is really important because of what it does. When I receive damage, create a random Crimson unit in your hand. A 3 mana 3/3 is just so much better stat line, especially in this game. It no longer dies the Mystic Shot, which is pretty big, and you can just do more. It's often played in like the Vladimir self-damage deck, so having that one extra bit of health to play with is really important. I think it's a pretty good solid change overall. The next card to get a buff was Jeweled Protector, and its stats were increased by 1/1. It went from a 3/3 to a 4/4. I think this is pretty important for this card. It is very slow on tempo, and even now as a 5 mana 4/4, it's still very slow. For one though, it's going to become a powerhouse in Expeditions. This card is just absolutely nuts in Expeditions, so I expect to see that a lot. Just insanely strong to give plus 3/3, and really a 5 mana 5/5 is already played, so 5 mana 4/4 and then giving something in hand of your choice plus 3/3 is really good. However, I think it's going to be a bit too slow and constructed. There's just so many more things you can do in a constructed list for 5 mana than you can in an expedition list, for example, and so I see Jeweled Protector not really seeing too much play still, and I will say the buff scares me a little bit, especially in Expedition, where Expedition is really important for working on your collection, so I think it is a card they have to be a bit careful with, but I think it's a good change overall. Our next buff is Scuttle Guys. Now has Fearsome, and I think this is really important because it did get chump blocked pretty easily before, especially by the number of spiders that we still see on the ladder, and I think having Fearsome does help it just be a little bit better. I don't know where exactly it will find a home, and even if it will, but I think it's a really good change for the card. I think it's just a little bit of help that it needs, but I don't necessarily see it being played all the time. Tortured Prodigy power is now 4 instead of 3, and it reads, when an ally dies, refill your spell mana. I don't necessarily see this finding a spot anywhere in the meta right now. I think it helps it, but you really have to be having a deck that really relies on the spell mana, and in SI, you're not seeing that as much, so I don't really expect it to be anywhere right now. It is a card that in the future, if certain things are printed, it can become very powerful, so it is a card you have to be careful with. Really, any card that has refill your spell mana or refill your mana, any cards that manipulate mana, you have to be careful as a card designer because they can become very OP or very unfun very quickly. They can often allow for different combos. Some of them can be fine and healthy, and other times they are not. So it is something you have to be careful with, and we'll see what happens in the future with this card. I don't expect to see it being played that much after this patch, but I do expect it to potentially see play in the future as we get more sets and more cards that could possibly synergize with this card. Our next buff is the Arena Battlecaster, going from 1 health to 2 health. This one is crazy because, as we know, 1 health is very susceptible to Vile Feast. It is a core set card. It's always going to be there as far as we know. Playing 1 health creatures means that you, against SI, you're very likely to get Vile Feasted. This takes that away, and on top of this is giving buffs to a bunch of allies as well. A 2 mana 2/2 is not too bad of a stat line, and plus all the buffs makes this a pretty solid Noxus card, and I expect it to see quite a bit of play. Those are the buffs, so let's go ahead and talk about the nerfs now. The first nerf, and a very big one, is back-to-back went from 5 mana to 6 mana. This is absolutely huge, but there isn't going to be too many people very upset about this. This card was ridiculously strong for what it did. A burst spell that gave plus 6/6, and 2 targets of your choice was incredibly strong, often allowed for 2 solid trades or just pushing that last bit of damage. I think it going to 6 is going to hurt it, well, obviously, but I don't think it's going to make this card unplayable. I do think it hurts Demacia quite a bit though. Demacia, in Constructed at least, has already been having a hard time seeing a ton of play, except for the splash effects onto things such as the Elusives, and I'm not really sure what happens to Demacia in the future. I think it's a bit shaky ground for it, but I do think this card isn't going to disappear. Maybe not a 3 of anymore, maybe we see it more as a 1 or a 2 of. It's a bit hard to say this early because the card is so much slower now, but I don't think it just disappears off the face of the earth. Now for potentially the most controversial change is Deny going up to 4 mana from previously 3 mana. This change, I really have to think about how I feel about it. I know this is probably the most debated about card in Runeterra right now. It is so many people of, oh, I do this, I do that, I play Magic, I've done this, and is this card healthy, is it not healthy, can you play around it, can you not play around it, blah blah blah, you know, all that. It's in there a lot. I think Deny needed to be changed somehow. I don't necessarily know if 3 to 4 was the way I would do it. This probably just, I don't know, it might just trash the card. I don't even see myself slotting this in as a 1 of. Maybe as a lower curve aggro I could, but this kind of makes Ionia kind of garbage in some ways. I mean, Elusives are getting hurt too, which we'll see later, and Deny's getting hurt. I think Elusives are getting just completely, and well, the Demacia buff too. Like, I think Elusives are just getting dumped. Like, they are kind of garbage now. I think Deny is gone. I think we're going to see a lot more of those slower spells such as Harrowing. They're going to come to play. Avalanche. I think we're going to see a bunch of control just rise up after this, and I think Heimer is going to become very strong. Ashe. I mean, there's just so much that becomes very, very good when this card is gone. I think Freylord gets a huge buff. I think SI gets a huge buff from Deny being gone. I mean, maybe saying being gone isn't the correct thing to say, but this is definitely a huge, just like, punch in the gut for Deny and Ionia. I think there could have been better ways to change this card, and I don't think having a counterspell in the game by any means is unhealthy. I do think that this card prevented too many cards from being played though. You lost cards like Warmother's Call, Harrowing, and Avalanche, and a few others that were just never played because of the very existence of this Deny card. And I think now we're going to see a bit more diversity in that aspect. I think we might see a bit more greed, a bit more of a greed fest because of Deny being kind of gone. And it's something to worry about some. Deny did keep greed in check very well, but it also limited the deck diversity quite a bit too. It will be really interesting to see how the meta shapes out as this card kind of moves out of favor. It already was in high ladder, but that was because people were adjusting to the meta, not necessarily because of the power level of the card. Its existence limited a lot of cards, and now those cards are going to be out there, and I'm a bit scared to see what's going to happen with that. The next one on the chopping block, as if Ionia hadn't already been destroyed enough, Inspiring Mentor is it is getting destroyed here. It is, I don't even know if it's playable anymore. I personally was not a fan of Inspiring Mentor. To me, I would have argued it as the most broken card in the game, which not many people would have agreed, I don't think. It is one that just kind of slid under people's radars, but the fact that you had a 1 mana 1/1 and then chose what to give plus 1/1 to, that health was so important, especially against SI who has Vile Feast. And then just other things too, of making a 4/3 the elusive on turn 2, like what is that? And then being able to just buff something else too. It is just a ridiculously strong card, and I like seeing it be nerfed. I don't know how playable this card is. I see things like Fleet Feather Tracker instead. I'm just like, wow, it's just so much more of a better card. I do like how they at least gave it the health buff. That's something, because it's better than nothing at least now, but it's I don't really see this card being played much at all anymore, and mostly I don't see Ionia played either, so I don't really know if that's all that telling. You know how we said that Elusives got hit? Well, Kinka Lifeblade also got hit, reducing its health from 3 to 2. It essentially just dies to Mystic Shot now, and it really just kind of dies to everything. It's just not a good card anymore. I think it's pretty garbage now, and I don't think it's played like ever, and the buffs aren't there for it, and it's kind of a really sad 4-2 now. So not too much more to say about that one. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. The next one is Commander Ledros. This is one of the highly debated about cards about it rounding up, rounding down. Well, the rounding up is here to stay, but its cost went from 9 and the power also went to 9. To me, I didn't really see this card as an issue, and I still don't. It's very, very slow. It's a 9 mana, 9/6. This card was obviously printed for Riot to have ways to end games. They don't want the games to go on to milling and go very long. They want the quicker 5 to 10 minute games because it is going to be a very mobile focused game, which oftentimes, you know, if you're going somewhere, you don't want to play a 30-minute grindy game. That's just how the game is designed, and I'm okay with that. If you're not okay with it, probably not the game for you, but this is one of those cards that's meant to be a game ender. But 9 mana, 9/6, that tempo is just very, very low. You're going to be able to go wide most of the time and often under this card. It's just there kind of to keep greed in check, and I'm very okay with that. I don't really mind the change. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's bad. And I don't really mind the rounding. Just because that's why the card is there, is to keep greed in check, and at some point it's going to kill you. But that's a 9 mana card. Like, if you're losing because someone played a 9 mana card 3 or 4 times, I think that's just an issue that you have. I don't really know what else to say. Also in SI, we had Rhasa nerfed, and this is no surprise to anyone. The only change here is went from 7 mana to 8 mana, and I don't know how much this is played. Because the Elusives were nerfed so hard, I think that we will see slower decks come into play, except I do worry about Elnuks kind of taking over, to be honest. But I think this card isn't gutted. I think it still sees play, and I'm pretty happy with this change. I think it seems pretty strong overall. The final nerf is to Wraithcaller. It is no longer has the Fearsome tag. I think this is a great change. Some people are like, oh, that's not enough, you know, Fearsome's still gonna be great. I don't think Fearsomes will be bad, but I don't think they're as good as they are by like any means, because Wraithcaller allows for things like Sentry to be played in Freylord, and you can chump block a bit more, and there's more interactivity this way. There's just a lot more you can do when this card no longer has Fearsome, and just being able to chump block it, I think, is huge. I think it's a really good change. It's very small, but I think it's very significant. I think it's a lot more significant than people think. However, I do think that SI will still be a very strong list. The winners of this patch, the ones that missed the hit, I think the biggest one is Hecarim. I think Hecarim is just very, very, very strong, and I'm quite shocked he wasn't touched in any way. I think that card is just going to continue to be very dominant in various ways, especially with the Elusives being gone. I think it's going to be very strong. I do think it has a problem against Freeze, obviously, but I do expect to see lots of Hecarim decks on LoR. Other winners is really SI in general. Doesn't really get hit that hard for as much it's been complained about, as strong as it is. We see Elise dodging the bullet, Mark the Isles, a card that has so much power of being able to trade, make things in some ways just so scared to block things too, because Mark the Isles combat trick. That card is disgusting, and it's not touch. Glimpse, another one that I was surprised to not see it go up to 3 mana. I don't hate it not being changed, but I think that card is pretty ridiculous, so I'm a bit shocked to see it not change as well. Ashe has been pretty strong, her Crystal Arrow in particular. People are expecting that to be changed somehow, and it was not. Elnuks, untouched. Frenzied Skitter, untouched. And then just slower decks in general, not really touched. Champions like Heimer and Ezreal, not touched. And I think those cards will just start dominating this meta. I think it's just going to become more and more greedy, you know, adding karmas and stuff. That was already kind of the trend. And I think it's just going to become a bit worse with Deny being nerfed to a 4. That's what I expect. And then I think another huge winner of this patch is Mystic Shot. So many more things are just killed by it now. I think that card, P and Z overall, is going to be very strong, and I think it got a nice thumbs up in this. The losers of this, no surprise, Elusives and Ionia. Pretty much gutted. I think Ionia is number 6 on the region tier list, pretty low down. I think Fearsome gets hit some, but I think that it's going to adjust to a different deck style, and I think it's going to be very strong still. Aggro as a whole, losing Deny was a huge tool for a lot of the aggro. This makes so many of the control spells so much better, and then aggro cards were generally the ones that were hit, and control was actually just buffed overall. I'm a bit on that. I questioned it a lot because generally what happens is these aggro decks are the first ones to start really sprouting up and, you know, winning, and then the control takes a little bit longer because it's reacting to the aggro, so control just takes longer to develop and make. So I think that this is going to become an issue. They did say this in the notes that they are watching control, but I think control is just going to take over, at least for like the 2 weeks until we have the next patches. I think Elnuks is actually going to pretty much take over too with Ezreal. It's kind of funny to say that. It sounds like a joke, but I think that is definitely going to be the case. For the new region tier list, I think PNZ and Freylord are pretty close to each other. PNZ probably the highest. Freylord after. The freeze is going to be incredibly strong. It's going to be very good against the aggro that has already been weakened. After that, I think SI. I think that SI aggro is still going to be fairly good, and I think that these spells are going to be very good, such as harrowing and stuff. Now that Deny is nerfed, I think it's going to get cut from a lot of lists, and I think the greed is going to start going up and up and up. Then after that, Noxus, which didn't really get too much of a hit. It got a little bit of a buff, but I still just don't see on the power level as the other three listed above it. And then after that is Demacia, which takes a very huge hit, losing back to back. It was already one of the weaker archetypes as far as like a mono Demacia. It still has challengers and Fiora, which are still not bad, but with the aggro weakening, I think this actually makes them worse in a lot of ways. So I think that's on my 5th one, and then 6 is going to be Ionia, which I feel like got absolutely gutted. Pretty much a disaster for Ionia. It is going to be, I don't see it really being played much at all now. I think it's going to kind of just disappear. The future tier 1 decks, I think Ezreal Elnuks is going to be way up there. I think it's going to be very good. I think the deck will keep on changing as we go, probably get more greedy. I think the Heimer decks are going to be really good. You know, Karma thrown in there at times as well. I think SI aggro is still in a pretty good spot. It got to keep Hecarim and Elise, which were the 2 best champions for it. And then on top of that, it already had good cards even before the Fearsomes really became a thing. I think the deck is still going to be pretty good for aggro, but I do think it will get highly countered by the Ashe control or mid-range decks that I expect to see. I expect to see a lot of freeze decks. Also too, the Ezreal decks also do pretty well against it too. So I expect these control or slow mid-range to do the best in the meta in the future. And then I guess SI for aggro because Elusive pretty much got gutted. And yeah, overall, those are my thoughts, is that we're going to see a huge control meta, and we're slowly going to see it get more and more greedy, and then we might start seeing Deny getting slotted in again just in response for a greed, and I think it's just going to kind of be this tug of war back and forth between the two. Thank you so much for watching my video. Like, subscribe, and comment. I appreciate it a lot. Bye!